All right, class, we're going to get started here on our review. This is the third and final week discussing World War II, and we will discuss the fall of Germany and Japan to the Allied powers. Let's take a time to review first. As I had called it in the past, the prelude to war. As the global depression continued and the effects of the First War set in, many countries had internal divisions. In Asia, the Imperial Japanese violently controlled much of Asia. In Europe, the desire for many countries to remain a democracy was not a reality as dictatorships replaced them. Even the Americans struggled and became politically unstable. We talked about Africa, how they would remain under European control, and we would see Italy sweep and control Ethiopia. Ethiopia's one plane would not even be able to stand a chance to Mussolini's plan. Around the same time that North Africa was being attacked, much of Asia was being controlled by Japan, and the Olympic Games were being held in Berlin for all to see the new Nazi craze. America was beginning the New Deal, we would say part two. The war to end all wars was looking like it had very little promise of staying a reality. So we discussed that the land that Hitler wanted before the war would start, remember we called it the chicken fingers. Appeasement would work for a while once Hitler and Stalin took Poland. And then Hitler's lightning war pushed France in which he would get his picture taken in front of the Eiffel Tower. All seemed to be going great for the Nazi war machine, pushing the British and French back to Dunkirk. Amazingly, divine things happened there. We know that the calm waters, the intense fog, and rounds of small boats taxiing what we call Operation Dynamo, evacuating the men was a success, evacuating almost 400,000 men to England. Thanks to this man, Robert Watson Watt, and the invention of radar, Operation Dynamo evacuated 400,000 men to England. There, the War of Britain would be waged, and a wonderful invention we just mentioned about Robert Watson Watt would be combined with the superpower and advanced fighter planes from the British would save the day and be their finest hour. Week two, we discussed United States involvement and then some changes that happened in 1941 and 1942. Despite the neutrality acts and blockades of oil, America is closer to war. Hitler decides to attack Russia with Operation Barbarossa. It failed, thankfully, making Germany repeat fighting on two fronts again. Things were improving all too well until the Japanese would hit us first at Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. As Matsui Fushida, here in this picture, would lead the 300 plus bombers in this truly would be a day that would live in infamy, as FDR would say. Mobilization of what would eventually be 10 million troops in the Battle of the Atlantic would be the longest continuous battle of the war. Operation Drumbeat, again, we mentioned before, with Hitler off the coast of Wilmington. America would decide to make its first stop in North Africa and defeat the German and Italian army and control the Mediterranean Sea. The Battle of Stalingrad was a failed offensive in the winters of 42 and 43, and the overwhelming effort of shipbuilding in America, even good old Wilmington, North Carolina, would overwhelm the enemy in the arms race. Wilmington saw a population increase from 32,000 in 1940 to 123,000 by 1944. The shipbuilding company would produce some 11 ships every month. These boats, and you can see in this image, the surrounding border of what Japan was able to control. These boats would be needed after a struggle in the Pacific, with General MacArthur not being able to take several islands under Japanese control for the months after December 7th, 1941 into 1942. To control the middle of the ocean and to break the bubble, as we called it, the Battle of Midway would be key. And you can see that right out there in the middle. Only losing the Fighting Lady, USS's Yorktown, the first one, not the one in Charleston Harbor today, the Americans could begin their island hopping campaign with the help of Admiral Nimitz and eventually boats like our USS North Carolina. America's support from home was key as we used ration books, war bonds, and the help from 30,000 plus enlisted women showing their Rosie the Riveter spirit and attitude. Even comedians like Bob Hope traveled 80,000 plus miles to entertain our troops and keep the spirits high. So, moving on to this week, I wanted to talk about a very important event, probably the most important event and turning point of the war, was D-Day. Despite all the help fighting on in 2 locations, as that was getting old, and the United States had to make the decision to make mainland Europe, planning by the Allies to attack what must remain top secret. This effort actually started many years in advance. Actually, weather delayed the now famous and largest seaborne invasion in history, what is known as Operation Overlord. I think of it as Overload, but Overlord. And D-Day happened on H hour, around 6 a.m. on June 6th, on 5 separate beaches on Normandy, France. As we will discuss, the Airborne Museum and eventually go after we get back to school. And as you read Dwight D. Eisenhower's Allied Expeditionary Force letter to the troops as they attacked, our airborne was very key in that battle. The 5 beaches that were stormed that day were actually a part of a process, and the Allied would use operations like Operation Fortitude, one of my favorites, and Operation Double Cross to help deceive the Germans. Maybe even watch the D-Day deception video on history.com, and you will see the inflatable planes and tanks that the Allies used in North England to confuse the Germans that they were going to attack further north. Operation Double Cross is another good one, which would be where agents very similar to James Bond 007 spies would be sent in to gather or sometimes give out fake news. My favorite, it's even a movie, The Man Who Never Was Operation Mincemeat. Should definitely look that one up. Higgins boats there and our invasion in Normandy. Here's the inflatable tanks. Look up Operation Double Cross, and Operation Mincemeat is my favorite. I don't have time to really talk about P-38s right this second. It's different ones, and you've done weapons. This is an interesting one, the MG-42, which is also called the Buzzsaw. Pretty incredible weapon there. 165,000 troops hit and conquered the beaches on that longest day. Even on June 5th, the French resistance on Normandy was warned of the Allied invasion by secret messages broadcasted over the BBC. Code phrases, it's hot in Suez and the ferries are on the carpet. With these signals, the French underground would initiate sabotage operations behind enemy lines to assist the evasions. Our airborne troops, of which we will eventually go and see at the museum in Fayetteville, were able to be dropped behind enemy lines by parachute or glider. All of these efforts allowed us to win the beaches after several days. By August 25th, after 3 grueling months of battle, the Allies liberated Paris. Hitler was surrounded, but this did not stop him from sending V1 and V2 rockets. This all led to, what the book doesn't mention, the Battle of the Bulge in the winter of 1944. One soldier said he thought he knew what cold was until he fought in the Battle of the Bulge. This would be Hitler's last offensive. Hitler would, from there, commit suicide alongside his new wife, Eva Braun, and his faithful dog, Blondie. Mussolini was even captured by the Italians and killed. VE Day, we know as Victory in Europe, was a time to celebrate. Sadly, we found all the evidence of what we know as the Holocaust, extreme treatment to the Jews. Holocaust means whole burnt, and we believe an estimated 6 million were murdered Jews. 2.5 million were in concentration camps, concentration camp called Auschwitz. My parents even visited there when they were in Germany, where I was born. Even people like Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a German pastor I mentioned, and I think one of you have the book, even tried to plot to kill Hitler. In this other picture here, the German people are being escorted through the concentration camp so they know the truth about what Hitler was deceiving them to do. Even Corrie ten Boom was freed from a concentration camp, I think Ravensbrück, after housing Jews in our own hiding place in the Netherlands. You should definitely check out the virtual tour. I think I showed a few classes as well. Now the focus would be on defeating Japan. The new 4-engine B-29 bombers that would be a great success in the United States, with victories in Saipan and the Philippines. General MacArthur's return was definitely a big one. Unfortunately, facing kamikaze dive bombers, battles like Leyte Gulf showed very difficult. We warned the Japanese many times that we had destructive bombs and would be forced to use them if not surrendered. It actually took 25 days to capture the island of Iwo Jima. That battle was referred to as the worst battle since Gettysburg. On the first day, 566 Marines died. In all, 27 Americans received the Medal of Honor just at that one battle. We even used code talkers, Navajo Indians. Some of our greatest fighters were African American, Native American, and Japanese American. I like this gentleman specifically was a medic who chose not to use a gun. A movie's made after it, but Hacksaw Ridge and Desmond Doss, he saved many soldiers by dragging them over a ridge and helping them get to safety. A great story of freedom. I even have a World War II letter I wanted to read you guys this week. Maybe you can have a chance to do that. Okinawa was another location, and the help from dogs as well on that. The victory came in Okinawa thanks to 10 days of bombing, but obviously the Japanese continued to come out of the black sands of Iwo Jima and the hills there like ants out of an ant pile. Newly sworn in President Truman, after the death of FDR on his fourth term, had to make an incredibly hard decision of dropping this weapon that every country was trying to complete, the atomic bomb, with the explosive power equal to 20,000 tons of TNT or dynamite and the surface heat of up to 540,000 degrees. The bomb would be dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Some people say Hiroshima, but August 6th and 9th. The fortunate city of Kokura was not bombed that day due to bad weather. Emperor Hirohito would finally surrender and state that he could not bear to see his people suffer any longer. The bombs, Little Boy and Fat Man, had definitely made their unfortunate emphasis and impact during this time. Here's President Truman and the B-29 bombers, picture of the Fat Man, and a test site during the Manhattan Project, and scientist Oppenheimer which is there. So you see the Japanese surrender, an activity that we'll do later on, but ultimately an estimated 55 million people had died during the war. Victory came at a great price, and reconstruction would definitely, and the rebuilding of Europe, eventually Japan would take that much longer. 10 million copies of the Bible and over 1,000 missionaries will be allowed to come back into Japan, and the gospel will be able to be shared again in Japan as we stayed and helped out them create a democracy. Here's the vocabulary, and it'll always be sent by PowerPoint for our quiz on Socrative later. Did want to take the time real quickly to explain the maps, and you can come back to this video and come to the very end. This was a quick review and a little bit of information on the end of the war. The first map that you're doing, European side, doesn't have all the continents centralized on the Europe battles. You're again going to color the battles yellow and the lake, seas, and oceans the blue. Listed the Axis powers and even the parts that Hitler took over, and then Italy, and then Romania and Bulgaria. You might want to pause it again when you get to this part, but the Allies would be in orange: Great Britain, France, Norway, Finland, and the Soviet Union, which is a large section. Color that neatly. This will be Thursday and Friday's assignment as you prepare for a quiz on Monday. The neutral powers will be everything in the white as well, and we're going to color them green. And then, again, take time to pause and look at this. For the Pacific map, this one's a little bit more complicated. I would take the time to color in blue all the Allied powers before Pearl Harbor.